Hey, let's make some Reese's in Serum. So the Reese bass is a staple of drum and bass these days, and it's actually pretty simple to make. It's all about detuning some saw waves. There's a few other options for making interesting moving basses that we're going to go through as well, but we'll start off with the classics. Okay, so we're here in Ableton, and I've got a copy of the original Reese bass, so let's check it out. So it's got a nice thick texture to it. Originally this was sampled and pitched around to make new bass lines out of it, but what we're going to do today is we're going to create something pretty similar straight out of Serum. So here's the original again. So we don't really need that for now. Okay, so we're in Serum and we've got this, which is just the default patch. I'm actually going to grab the basic shapes sawtooth because I like that one better. It probably doesn't really matter. There we go. And the key to the original sound is detuning. So we'll take two copies. So we've got two sawtooths playing simultaneously. Over in the global section, you can control the width of the unison. This column here controls the unison parameters for the first oscillator. So we're going to bring width right down. So so we've got no stereo depth in our Reese bass for the moment. You can hear things are nicely phasing against each other. If we bring detune all the way down, not very interesting. As we bring it up, the beating starts to happen. And the further apart we make the detune, the faster the beating. So about there feels good. Now we can augment this with a sub. Let's bring it down an octave. And of course in the original it's nice and filtered. Let's use a 24 dB. Let's give it a little filter overdrive. Alright, so we got a nice bass that's wobbling around a bit there. So we can give it some additional movement by using an LFO. Maybe slow that down. And of course, if you want to make a variation on this, you can keep throwing in more unison voices. So that's pretty much it for the classic Reese bass sound. The movement is coming from the detuned oscillators and a little bit from the filter movement. Now when this was originally sampled, it would have been played back at different pitches, which would have caused the beating to happen faster at higher pitches. So we can kind of emulate that by using the note parameter. And so we're playing this low note. Turn off the filter so we can hear what's going on. Maybe we'll bring the unison down so we can really clearly hear it. So playing a low note, we can hear that the phasing is pretty slow. But playing a high note, we want it to move faster. At the moment, it doesn't do that. But we can use the note modifier in Serum to do that. So let's set our low position first. So we'll put a node where our current low note is. But our high note, we want to affect the detuning. So we'll start modifying this curve. So I like it about there. So now we've got... Maybe that's a little extreme. So that sounds pretty good to me. We can kind of finish off this curve so we can go up even higher without it getting too out of control. Now, of course, you can use different shapes in here and see what you get. Maybe we're bringing the detune amount down a little. We'll put it in mono legato mode. We'll give it some portamento time. So that's a nice square Reese we got going on there. We'll put it back to a saw for now. And of course the usual tricks for Serum still apply. So we can make a sine wave over here in oscillator B. We've turned the level down so we're not actually going to hear it. And we'll do FM from B. So we're getting a pretty reasonable little sound there. Obviously effects which pair well with this are hyper, which adds the effect of more unison voices. Maybe go extreme. So we could get the rate to increase with the note as well. And compression is going to be handy. And we can probably pull out some of the tops. We can bring our filter back in. Actually, we could have the note affect the filter cutoff as well. And we could put it in a bit of a space with some reverb. We could use a second filter. Let's set up a notch. And we'll LFO that off a different LFO, which we will remove from BPM locking. We throw some distortion in the mix. I really like the diodes at the moment. Ooh. So the sub is causing the distortion to freak out. So essentially the main thing here is getting a nice moving sound to start with. So we could also use FM from B to create some additional movement. It's a bit much. And that's really the basics of it. As long as you've got a lot of movement in your original sound, you're going to get something that sounds pretty similar to that. And this is just kind of an idea of where to start. So to show you another way to get there, we'll start fresh with a new init patch and we'll create something similar using the oscillator effects. Okay, so we've got the init preset up and we're going to go to basic shapes and choose a sawtooth. And this time we're going to use sync no window. And you can see by sweeping through this, we get a pretty similar effect. So you can hear that that sounds like multiple saw waves. We'll use an LFO to modulate that. So we've got a pretty similar sound going on. It doesn't have all the movement of a unison. The interesting thing is that we can BPM lock that, or we can take it off BPM lock. And we can do the same thing with notes, but this time we're going to do it with the rate of the LFO. So that's our low note. And that's our high note. So if we throw a filter on that, and give it some drive, maybe make it 24, put some distortion on. That LFO is a bit fast for my taste now. Cool. Let's take off the filter. So yeah, we're getting a pretty similar sound. It's not as thick and rich as a unison, but with a bit of chorusing, we should be able to get somewhere. Maybe hyper instead of chorus. Cool. Let's try multiband compression. I'll duck the mids out. And of course we can put a filter back on this. Go for 24. We use the filter drive. Oops. And we'll use note to affect the cutoff again. And we'll put it in a bit of a space. Yeah, so we've got a pretty similar but different sound. So there's been various recreations of the Reese sound since it came about and various evolutions of it. And this kind of oscillator effect is definitely one of them, where people are using PWM or sync to get a fairly similar tone. It's similar, but it's a bit drier sounding, which actually can work quite well if you want something like a Reese, but something not quite as thick. We'll do another one just for fun. So we'll load an init patch and we'll go to basic shapes. And we'll get a saw. And this time we'll use FM from B. Turn B on, we'll turn its level down, get a sine wave. Or maybe something more complex than a sine wave. Sure, let's go with that. All right, and as we turn this up, cool, so let's give that FMing a little bit of movement, just the tiniest bit. We'll slow this down. Okay, so in effects we use hyper to give it some actual width. We can give it the old low pass treatment. And we use the note to push the cutoff up. We might LFO the cutoff a little bit as well, just to get more movement. Okay, so let's use the note to push the LFO rate. Actually, let's take the LFO off BPM sync. And we'll use note to push it faster. So I want it to be a little faster. See if we can get this. So you can use the fine tuning to just push the tuning off a little bit, get more interesting FM out of it. Probably bring the cutoff up a little. Okay, and that's going to sound really nice with some distortion. Let's wind up the drive a bit, maybe go for a diode. And once again, our good friend OTT. Okay, let's turn that up. Down a little. And we can use filter drive again to fatten this up. So we can probably put the LFO on the cutoff a little and use note to push the cutoff up. Bring it down again. Oh, we can put it in mono and legato mode so that it slides between notes. Yeah, so that's yet another way to get a pretty similar result. So I hope that gives you some ideas, whether it's just creating the classic detuned saws or whether it's using oscillator modulators to get extra movement into your sound. Hey, so thanks for watching my guide to Reese's in Serum. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, whether you're going to create the classic Reese or whether you're going to do something a little more forward thinking in Serum's oscillator modulators. There's really no wrong way to go about this. If you did like this, please do like the video and make sure you hit the subscribe button.